Okay. Stop whatever you're doing right now. I need you to understand something before we dive into this video. Because what I'm about to talk to you about is not just a movie. It's not just an animated film from China that crossed $1 billion at the box office. It is, and I say this with complete sincerity after sitting with it for days, one of the most emotionally overwhelming, visually staggering, and mythologically rich animated experiences I have ever witnessed in my entire life. And I've seen a lot of movies. I'm talking about Ne Zha 2. The sequel to the 2019 animated phenomenon that shattered every expectation for Chinese cinema, broke domestic box office records, and introduced Western audiences to a version of animated storytelling that Hollywood had never even attempted. And now, 6 years later, the sequel has arrived. And it didn't just clear the bar that the first film set. It launched itself over that bar, kept going, broke through the stratosphere, and planted its flag somewhere in the outer reaches of what animation as a medium is even capable of. Before I even get into the story, before I tell you what happens, who lives, who dies, what gods fall and what demons rise, I want to pose a question to you. A question that this film asks itself, loudly and without apology, from the very first frame to the very last. What does it mean to be born into a destiny you never chose? What do you do when the universe has already written your ending before you've even taken your first breath? When every force of heaven, every cosmic law, every whisper of fate is screaming at you that you are broken, that you are cursed, that you will burn, what do you do? Ne Zha has an answer. And it will wreck you. Alright. Let's get into it. Part 2, Movie Overview. Ne Zha 2 was released in China in January 2025, directed once again by Yang Wu, known in the industry by his pen name Zhao Zi, the same visionary auteur who crafted the original film back in 2019. The film is produced by Chengdu Becore Culture and Technology Company Limited and distributed through Inlight Pictures. Now here's where the cultural context becomes incredibly important for American audiences, because understanding where this film comes from, what tradition it's pulling from, what mythology it's drawing upon, fundamentally changes how you experience it. Ne Zha is not an original character. He is a deity. A mythological figure drawn from Chinese folk religion, primarily described in the 16th century classic novel Investiture of the Gods, known in Chinese as Feng Shen Yi. In Chinese mythology, Ne Zha is a child warrior god, a divine prince born to General Li Jing and Lady Yin, who, through a series of extraordinarily complicated events involving his own death and rebirth, becomes one of the most powerful and beloved figures in the entire pantheon of Chinese gods. He's brash. He's rebellious. He's got a fire wheel. He rides like a skateboard. He has a universe ring. He's essentially the Chinese mythological equivalent of what would happen if you crossed a Greek demigod with a punk rock teenager, gave them cosmic powers, and then put them through genuine, soul-crushing trauma. The first film, Ne Zha, Birth of the Demon Child, took this character and absolutely exploded with him. It reimagined the myth for modern audiences, centering on a version of Ne Zha who is born not as a divine spirit but as a demon spirit, destined by a cosmic error to be struck by divine lightning before his 3rd birthday. The film's central message, that fate is not a cage, that you define yourself, resonated with Chinese audiences so deeply that it became the highest-grossing animated film in Chinese history at the time, eventually crossing roughly $726 million globally. The expectations for Ne Zha 2 were, to put it mildly, astronomical. People weren't just hoping for a good sequel. They were hoping for a mythological epic. A follow-up that could honor the emotional weight of the first film while expanding the universe, deepening the mythology, and pushing the animation into entirely new territory. Did it deliver? I need you to buckle up. Because the answer is yes. Emphatically, breathtakingly, almost angrily yes. Part 3, Full Story Breakdown. Setting the stage, where we left off. To understand Ne Zha 2, you have to remember exactly where the first film ended. And I mean exactly, because this sequel picks up almost immediately after those events and uses every single thread the first movie planted. In Ne Zha, Birth of the Demon Child, we watched our protagonist, this wild-haired, dark-eyed, perpetually scowling child god, grow up under the shadow of a cosmic curse. He was meant to be born as a spirit pearl, a vessel of divine goodness. But through a cosmic accident engineered by the scheming Shen Gongbao, that spirit pearl was split. Ne Zha received the demon pill instead, a condensed force of darkness and destruction, while his best friend and eventual soulmate Ao Bing, the third prince of the Dragon King, received the spirit pearl.
Run!
The tragedy of that first film was the tragedy of two kids caught in a game they didn't create. Ao Bing was manipulated into becoming an agent of the Dragon Tribe's revenge against the gods who had imprisoned them. Ne Zha was condemned as a monster simply for existing. And when they finally clashed, when the story forced them to become enemies, it was devastating. Because by that point, we understood that these two boys loved each other. They were brothers in every way that mattered. Ne Zha ultimately sacrifices himself to stop the destruction. He is struck by the heavens' punishment, tribulation lightning, the divine sentence that was always coming for him. But just before the lightning strikes, Ao Bing steps in front of it, and they are both destroyed. Both reduced to nothing. Except Ne Zha's soul survives. Barely. Fragmented and clinging to existence, it's preserved in a lotus root construct, a temporary shell crafted by his father and his mother's desperate love. Ao Bing's fate is left more ambiguous, his spirit pearl shattered, his dragon body destroyed. That's where we begin. Act 1, Souls in Lotus, Gods in Crisis. Ne Zha 2 opens in a state of spiritual emergency. The lotus root body that houses Ne Zha's soul is deteriorating. It's crumbling, quite literally, petals falling, the construct weakening by the day. Ne Zha can still move, still talk, still get into trouble the way Ne Zha always does, but everyone around him knows the truth. The clock is ticking. The vessel is failing. And if they don't find a solution, Ne Zha's soul will scatter and cease to exist permanently. This opening section of the film is deliberately quiet in a way that the first movie almost never was. Zhao Zi is doing something sophisticated here. He's using stillness to establish stakes. We see Ne Zha at home with his family. His mother, Lady Yin, who in the first film was almost pathologically devoted to protecting her son from the world's cruelty, is shown here in a kind of controlled terror. She is the woman who told Ne Zha he would never be alone. Now she watches her son's hands occasionally flicker and become translucent, and she keeps her voice steady, and she keeps smiling, and it is absolutely gutting. His father, Li Jing, the general who spent most of the first film failing his son before finally rising to be the father Ne Zha deserved, is shown trying to find solutions, consulting ancient texts, writing to higher divine authorities, doing what military men do when they face an enemy they cannot fight. He strategizes. He plans. He refuses to accept the unacceptable. And Ne Zha himself? He's doing what Ne Zha always does. He's pretending he's fine. He's cracking jokes. He's practicing with his universe ring. He's being, in every external way, the same chaotic, defiant, magnificent kid he's always been. But there are these moments, quiet, unguarded seconds, where the camera catches him watching his own hands. Watching them flicker. And you can see on his face something that this character almost never shows. Fear. Not fear of death exactly. Fear of disappearing before he's become what he was supposed to be. Fear of being erased. The solution, when it emerges, is both mythologically creative and dramatically perfect. To stabilize Ne Zha's soul, to give it a real, permanent vessel, they need to find his original body. Or rather, what remains of it. The physical form of Ne Zha was destroyed, but his essential divine nature, his chi, his primal spiritual energy, was scattered across the cosmos rather than fully extinguished. If they can gather that energy and forge it into a new body, Ne Zha can be reborn properly. The problem? That scattered energy didn't just float away harmlessly. It was absorbed. By things. By places. By entities both cosmic and terrestrial. And recovering it won't just be a treasure hunt. It will mean confronting the full scope of the divine and demonic hierarchy that governs this mythological universe. It will mean going places and meeting beings that dwarf anything the first film introduced. And it will mean finding Ao Bing, the Dragon Boy and the Shattered Pearl. This is where Ne Zha 2 reveals the full ambition of its storytelling, because Ao Bing's storyline runs parallel to Ne Zha's for most of the first act and second act, and it is, I would argue, even more emotionally complex. Ao Bing survived. But survival, in this film, is treated with profound ambiguity. He survived in the way that a person who has lost most of themselves survives. The spirit pearl he carried, that condensed divine goodness that was meant to define him, that the first film told us would mark him as chosen, that pearl was shattered. And Ao Bing has been rebuilding himself from those fragments. Quite literally. You see him in the film holding pieces of broken jade light together through sheer willpower, essentially reassembling his own identity one shard at a time. What Zhao Zi is doing with Ao Bing in this film is nothing short of brilliant. The first film used him as a tragic mirror for Ne Zha, where Ne Zha was born into darkness but chose light. Ao Bing was born into supposed light but was manipulated toward darkness. Both were victims of cosmic forces that used children as pieces in a game. The sequel takes that mirror dynamic and deepens it by asking a new question: what happens after the grand sacrifice? What happens after the dramatic moment of redemption? What's left? What's left for Ao Bing is brokenness. And the film never lets you look away from that brokenness. He is quieter than in the first film. More measured. There's a stillness to him that wasn't there before. The kind of stillness you develop when you've been shattered and have spent a long time carefully holding yourself together. He moves through the world with this extraordinary delicacy, as if he knows that he is fragile in a way that dragons are not supposed to be fragile. And yet. When Ne Zha needs him, when the story demands it, Ao Bing shows up. Completely. Without hesitation. And those moments of showing up, of choosing connection over self-preservation, are where the film earns its emotional core. The scene where Ne Zha and Ao Bing are reunited is handled with such restraint that it almost made me angry, and then I realized the restraint was the point. There's no enormous dramatic confrontation. There's no tearful speech. Ne Zha finds Ao Bing in a mountain cave, sitting alone in the dark, holding himself together with concentration. Ne Zha walks in, sits down next to him, and says, with perfect Ne Zha energy, something to the effect of "you look terrible." And Ao Bing almost smiles. And that almost smile carries more weight than 1,000 tearful speeches would have. Act 2: The Cosmic Hierarchy Revealed. This is where Ne Zha 2 transforms from a personal story into an epic mythology, and the transition is handled with a confidence that I found genuinely breathtaking. As the quest to recover Ne Zha's scattered spiritual energy unfolds, the film begins pulling back the lens. Way back. We're not just in the mortal realm anymore. We're moving through layers of the Chinese cosmological universe, through the celestial courts, through the undersea dragon palaces, through ancient mountains where immortal cultivators have been locked in meditation for 10,000 years, through realms of spiritual energy so vast that the human characters navigating them look like dust motes in a cathedral. And this is where the film's visual ambition goes fully nuclear. I need to pause the story breakdown here for just a moment because I cannot in good conscience talk about the plot of this film without acknowledging that the animation, the pure visual achievement of what Zhao Zi and his team have created, is unlike anything I have seen from any animation studio anywhere in the world right now. And I include Pixar and Studio Ghibli in that statement. The color work alone. The film uses color as emotional language in a way that I found genuinely moving. Ne Zha's world is warm, reds and oranges and golds, fire energy, living energy. The celestial court is rendered in cold blues and whites, pristine, beautiful, inhuman. The dragon realms are deep greens and teals and purples. And then there are these transitional spaces, pocket dimensions, spiritual conduits, places between the mortal and divine, that combine these palettes in ways that shouldn't work but absolutely do, creating visual experiences that feel genuinely otherworldly. But back to the story. The quest eventually leads Ne Zha and his allies, which include not just Ao Bing but several other characters both returning from the first film and new, into conflict with the celestial authority itself. Because here's the thing about collecting Ne Zha's scattered divine energy, the entities and systems that have absorbed that energy don't necessarily want to give it back. And some of them have been instructed not to. This is where the film introduces what I consider its most important new narrative element, the figure of the primordial Lord of Heaven. In Chinese mythology, this figure, Yun Shi Tianzun, one of the three pure ones, is among the highest divine authorities in the entire cosmos. In this film, that figure has a specific interest in Ne Zha's fate. And that interest is not benevolent. The cosmological politics here are genuinely fascinating, and the film handles them with surprising sophistication for what is ostensibly a film aimed at family audiences. The celestial court is not portrayed as simply good. It is portrayed as powerful and self-perpetuating and deeply invested in maintaining a status quo that benefits those at the top of the hierarchy. Ne Zha represents a disruption to that status quo, not because he's evil, but because he survived. Because he refused to stay dead. Because a demon child who should have been erased has instead become something that the established order has no category for. And powerful systems, this film argues quietly but persistently, tend to destroy what they cannot categorize. The Dragon King and the Price of Pride. While the celestial politics unfold, a parallel story develops in the underwater realm involving the Dragon King and the broader Dragon Tribe, whose plot in the first film centered on Ao Bing's tragic manipulation. The Dragon Tribe's storyline in Ne Zha 2 is one of the film's most morally complex threads. These are creatures who have been subjugated, imprisoned, and humiliated by the celestial order for generations. Their grievances are legitimate. Their suffering is real. The first film established this clearly. The Dragon Kings were sealed in the sea by the Jade Emperor and reduced from cosmic powers to subordinate spirits, and their resentment had curdled over millennia into something poisonous. Ne Zha 2 doesn't let that resentment resolve easily. The Dragon King's arc in this film asks whether justified anger can still lead to unjust action. Whether being the victim of a system makes you immune to becoming a villain within that same system. It's genuinely nuanced stuff, and the film refuses to give you simple answers. Ao Bing sits at the center of this tension in a way that becomes increasingly painful as the film develops. He loves his father. He understands his father's pain. And he watched his father use his children, as instruments of revenge without ever really asking if that's what they wanted. The scene where Ao Bing and his father finally speak honestly, where Ao Bing doesn't shout, doesn't accuse, just states quietly what he saw and what it cost him, is one of the film's most quietly devastating sequences. Act 2 Escalation, Shen Gongbao's return and the true conspiracy. If you remember Shen Gongbao from the first film, you remember him as the scheming immortal who engineered the cosmic mix-up that gave Ne Zha the demon pill and set all of these events in motion. A slippery, morally flexible figure played with tremendous self-aware flair. He was a villain, but he was a villain with his own grievances, his own wounds, his own sense of cosmic injustice. He's back. And his role in the second film is significantly more complex than his role in the first. What Ne Zha 2 reveals, and this is where the story starts moving at a pace that genuinely left me breathless, is that Shen Gongbao's scheme in the first film was not purely of his own devising. He was, himself, a piece in a larger game. The forces that instructed him, that pointed him toward the spirit pearl and the demon pill and the whole elaborate catastrophe, go much higher up the cosmic hierarchy than he does. And the revelation of who those forces are, and what they actually want, reframes the entire mythology of both films in ways that I found genuinely shocking. I'm not going to give you every detail here, because part of the joy of this film is watching the conspiracy unfold and realizing, layer by layer, how deep it goes. But I will say this, the film's central dramatic reveal changes the nature of Ne Zha's existence from a story about individual destiny to a story about systemic power. Ne Zha was not just an accident. He was not just a cosmic error. He was the result of a deliberate decision made at the highest levels of divine authority, and the reason behind that decision is both philosophically rich and profoundly dark. Act 3, The Battle of Heaven. And then the third act arrives, and this film just goes off. I want you to imagine a battle sequence that makes the fight sequences from the first film look like a rough draft. That takes everything Zhao Zi and his team learned from 5 years of additional technical development and deploys it in a sequence that runs for what feels like a glorious, overwhelming, impossible 40+ minutes of pure cinematic spectacle. The battle that concludes Ne Zha 2 operates on multiple registers simultaneously, which is what separates it from just being an impressive action sequence. It's physically spectacular, the scale, the choreography, the visual creativity, the way the film uses mythological weapons and powers in combinations you've never seen before. But it's also emotionally legible throughout. You always know what every character is fighting for. You always understand the stakes. And because the film has done such extraordinary work building these characters and their relationships over the course of 2 films, every moment of peril and sacrifice and triumph lands with enormous weight. Ne Zha, finally given a new form, finally properly embodied, finally reborn in the fullness of his power, is breathtaking. The design of his full divine form in this film is one of the single greatest character design achievements in the history of Chinese animation. I'm not hedging when I say that. His divine form pulls from the deepest traditions of the mythology, the lotus boy imagery, the flame imagery, the armor of divine fire, and synthesizes it with something wholly contemporary and wholly original. He looks like a god. A real one. Not a sanitized, committee-designed, brand-safe god. A terrifying, beautiful, completely wild cosmic force that also happens to be a teenage boy who still slightly slouches. Ao Bing fights alongside him. Of course he does. And the visual language the film uses to represent their friendship in battle, the way their fighting styles complement each other, the way their colors interweave, Ne Zha's fire and Ao Bing's ice and water, is simply gorgeous. They are literally yin and yang made visible, and the film knows it, and it leans into that symbolism without ever letting it become heavy-handed. There are losses in this battle. Real ones. Characters you have come to care about across 2 films do not all make it through. And the film handles those losses with gravity and genuine sadness rather than brushing past them for the sake of triumphalist momentum. There's one particular loss, and I won't tell you who, that I did not see coming. That I was completely unprepared for. That had my theater absolutely silent for a long, raw moment before the story moved forward. The resolution, rebirth, and the question that remains. Without revealing every detail of the ending, I want to describe what the film's conclusion achieves. Ne Zha 2 does not end with the fantasy of a fully fixed universe. It does not give you a clean slate or a guaranteed happy ever after. The cosmic system that oppressed and exploited the characters in this story is damaged, significantly, perhaps irreparably, but it has not been entirely dismantled. The forces that were moved and changed and broken by the events of this story are real. But they are not the only forces in the cosmos. What the ending gives you instead is something more honest and, I would argue, more meaningful. It gives you people who have changed. Ne Zha, who was born into a curse and has now been reborn on his own terms, stands at the beginning of something rather than the end of something. The story isn't over. His story is just truly beginning without the shadow of his childhood destiny over him, beginning as himself rather than as someone else's instrument. And the final image of the film, which I will absolutely not spoil, but which involves fire and open sky and a boy who has fought the entire universe just to exist, is one of the most purely beautiful images I have seen in any film in years. Part 4, Character and Performance Analysis. Ne Zha, the Demon Child Reborn. Let's talk about Ne Zha as a character, because this is a protagonist who could so easily tip into obnoxiousness or wish fulfillment or generic chosen one archetype and instead manages to be something genuinely rare, a character who is simultaneously completely extraordinary and completely specific. What makes Ne Zha work across both films is that his defiance is never abstract. It's always personal. He doesn't rebel against fate because he's read a philosophical text about free will. He rebels because fate has told him that he is a monster, and everyone who has ever looked at him without fear has shown him that that's wrong. His mother saw him as a son. Ao Bing saw him as a friend. His father, eventually, painfully, saw him as someone worth protecting. These relationships are the engine of his defiance. Not ideology. Love. And that grounding in love makes his anger heroic rather than just destructive. In the second film, Ne Zha undergoes his most significant character development in the quieter moments rather than the larger ones. The version of Ne Zha we see in this film has been humbled, not broken, never broken, but genuinely taught by the events of the first film that the universe is larger and more complex and more dangerous than even he imagined. There's a maturity growing in him that sits fascinatingly alongside his fundamental wildness. He's still Ne Zha. Still impulsive, still scowling, still absolutely incapable of doing what he's told. But there are moments in this film where you can see him making choices rather than just reacting. And that's growth. The voice work in the original Chinese is extraordinarily good. Ne Zha's voice actor delivers the character with this specific quality, a roughness, an edge, a kind of permanent hoarseness that suggests someone who has spent their whole life fighting, that makes him feel physically real in a way animated characters often don't. Ao Bing, the gentle devastation. I've already talked a lot about Ao Bing in the story breakdown because I frankly cannot stop talking about him. He is my favorite character in this entire cinematic universe, and Ne Zha 2 gives him more to work with than the first film did. The key to Ao Bing is that he is profoundly kind in a world that has given him every reason not to be. He has been manipulated by his own father. He has been shattered, literally, spiritually shattered. He has had his identity taken from him and forced to rebuild it from fragments. And somehow, through all of that, he remains gentle. He remains someone who cares about others before himself. That gentleness is not weakness. The film is very clear about that. Ao Bing is extraordinarily powerful, and when he fights with a cold, precise ferocity that is genuinely formidable. But his power has never been what defines him. What defines him is his capacity for connection. His capacity to see other people, really see them, with compassion rather than calculation. His relationship with Ne Zha is the emotional backbone of both films, and in the second film it reaches a depth that genuinely moved me. These two characters complete each other in the way that the best fictional friendships do, not by being the same, but by being exactly what the other needs. Ne Zha brings Ao Bing fire and forward momentum. Ao Bing brings Ne Zha depth and steadiness. Together they are something neither of them could be alone. Taiyi Zhenren, the master who actually cares. Ne Zha's teacher and quasi-mentor, Taiyi Zhenren, continues to be one of the most charming supporting characters in the mythology. A genuinely powerful immortal who has decided that the best way to navigate cosmic politics is to be underestimated. Taiyi in the second film gets moments of both genuine comedy and genuine heroism. What I love about Taiyi across both films is that his care for Ne Zha is absolutely authentic and absolutely uncomplicated. He doesn't have an agenda. He's not positioning himself within the celestial hierarchy. He just loves this kid and wants him to survive and flourish. In a story full of cosmic forces with ulterior motives, Taiyi's simple, uncalculating affection for Ne Zha is quietly radical. He gets several significant action moments in the second film that showcase how formidable he actually is when he's not playing the bumbling eccentric, and those moments work brilliantly precisely because the film has spent so long establishing him as fundamentally soft. When Taiyi gets serious, you feel it. Lady Yin, the mother who carries everything. If there is an underappreciated performance in this film, it is the characterization of Lady Yin. She doesn't have the most screen time. She doesn't get the most dramatic speeches. But her presence in the film is quietly enormous, because she functions as the emotional North Star of the entire story. Lady Yin is the character who first truly saw Ne Zha, not the demon child, not the curse, not the cosmic mistake, but her son. Her actual, specific, beloved son. And the film understands that this act of seeing, of refusing to accept the world's judgment of the person you love, is not a passive act. It is the most radical thing a person can do in a universe designed to sort and label and condemn. In the second film, Lady Yin's terror is in her restraint. She does not fall apart. She does not demand that the universe explain itself to her. She holds on, and holds together, and keeps showing up for her son, and every frame she's in is saturated with a love so fierce it almost reads as violence. There's a scene, relatively early in the second film, where she is helping Ne Zha with his deteriorating lotus root form, tending to him with the careful, practiced motions of someone who has been holding a breaking thing together for a long time. And Ne Zha, being Ne Zha, makes a joke about it. And Lady Yin laughs. And for just a fraction of a second after she laughs, the camera catches her face in an unguarded moment, and the expression there is so complex, so layered with love and terror and determination and grief. It is one of the best pieces of character animation I have ever seen. Li Jing, the father who arrived late but completely. General Li Jing's arc in the second film is the completion of the redemption arc that the first film began for him. He was the father who failed his son for most of Ne Zha's childhood, the general who was afraid of his own child, who accepted the world's judgment of Ne Zha rather than fighting it. His redemption in the first film was hard-won and genuine. In the second film, he gets to be the father he should always have been. Li Jing in the second film is characterized by a kind of fierce, protective love that his military training has given a very specific form. He loves Ne Zha the way a general protects a stronghold, absolutely, strategically, with total commitment and zero reservation. He will fight anything. He will petition anyone. He will walk into any court, celestial or otherwise, and demand that his son be given his due. There's a moment in the second act where Li Jing stands before a divine authority that completely outclasses him in power and refuses to yield. He stands there, this mortal general with his mortal weapons and his mortal life, in front of something that could extinguish him like a candle flame, and he does not yield. And the way the scene is framed makes it perfectly clear that he is not being foolish or suicidal. He is being a father. And that, the film argues, is its own kind of cosmic power. Part 5, Themes, Symbolism, and Subtext. The central theme, self-determination against cosmic systems. The overarching theme of both Ne Zha films, and the second one articulates it even more explicitly, is the question of individual agency within deterministic systems. In the first film, that determinism was expressed as personal destiny. Ne Zha was fated to be a demon, fated to be destroyed, and the story was about his refusal of that personal fate. In the second film, Zhao Zi zooms out considerably. The question is no longer about personal fate. It's about the systems that produce and enforce fate. The celestial hierarchy is not just a backdrop in this film. It is the antagonist, or at least, a major dimension of the antagonism. And the film's critique of that hierarchy is pointed and persistent. The celestial court in Ne Zha 2 is portrayed as a bureaucratic machine that has rationalized its own self-perpetuation as cosmic justice. It doesn't care about Ne Zha because Ne Zha doesn't fit its categories. He was supposed to be destroyed. The fact that he survived is, from the hierarchy's perspective, an administrative error that needs correction. And the horror of that, the horror of being seen as an administrative error by the forces that supposedly govern your universe, is something the film communicates with tremendous clarity. This resonates in ways that extend well beyond the mythological context. The experience of being designated as wrong, as other, as something that the established order cannot accommodate and therefore must eliminate, that is an experience that vast numbers of people have had and continue to have. Ne Zha's defiance of the celestial order is, on this level, a deeply humanist statement about the right of individuals to exist on their own terms regardless of what any system, divine, social, political, has decided they should be. The symbolism of fire and ice. The visual and thematic symbolism of fire and ice, Ne Zha and Ao Bing, is one of the most elegant elements of both films, and the second film extends and deepens it beautifully. Fire, in the classical Chinese cosmological framework that the film draws on, represents yang energy, active, transformative, aggressive, solar. Ice and water represent yin energy, receptive, deep, hidden, lunar. Ne Zha is pure yang energy. Ao Bing is pure yin. And yet they are not opposites in the reductive sense, they are complementary. They create balance and wholeness together. The film's battle choreography leans heavily into this visual symbolism. When Ne Zha and Ao Bing fight together, their attacks don't just add together, they interact. Fire and ice create steam. Extreme cold and extreme heat create pressure differentials that generate wind and movement. They don't fight in parallel. They fight as a system. And watching that system operate at full power in the third act is visually extraordinary. But the symbolism goes deeper than aesthetics. The yin-yang dynamic is fundamentally about the inseparability of apparent opposites, the idea that light and dark, fire and water, are not enemies but partners in the maintenance of balance. The film's central relationship is a living illustration of this principle. Ne Zha and Ao Bing together represent wholeness. Separated, each of them is powerful but incomplete. And the forces that want to keep them apart, the forces that want to categorize and separate rather than integrate, are the same forces that the film identifies as genuinely dangerous. Rebirth imagery, lotus, flame, and renewal. The lotus is one of the most significant symbols in both Chinese folk religion and Buddhist iconography. It is the flower that grows in mud and darkness and rises to bloom in clean water and light. It is the symbol of spiritual rebirth, of purification, of the possibility of achieving beauty and transcendence regardless of the conditions of one's origin. Ne Zha's connection to the lotus symbol runs through both films. His temporary vessel in the second film is literally a lotus root construct, and reaches its fullest expression in his final divine form, which incorporates lotus imagery in ways both obvious and subtle. He is, the film argues, the lotus principle made flesh, a being born in darkness and corruption who has risen, through choice, through love, through sheer refusal to be what he was told he was, into something luminous and real. The fire imagery operates somewhat differently. Fire is transformative but also consuming. Ne Zha's fire has always been double-edged. It warms and it burns, it illuminates and it destroys. The second film's most sophisticated deployment of the fire symbolism is in how it maps onto Ne Zha's moral journey. The uncontrolled fire of the first film, destructive, reactive, potentially catastrophic, is gradually, across both films, brought into intentionality. Ne Zha learns to direct his fire rather than simply release it. And that directedness is what transforms destructive power into heroic power. Parent-child relationships, the deepest wound. Both Ne Zha films are, at their hearts, deeply concerned with parent-child relationships. Not just Ne Zha's relationships with his parents, but the broader pattern across multiple families in the story. The Dragon King and Ao Bing. T and Ne Zha. Li Jing and Ne Zha. Lady Yin and Ne Zha. The primordial lord and the structures he's created. All of these are, in various ways, examinations of the relationship between those who have power and those who were created or shaped by that power. The film's most radical parenting argument, which it makes quietly but insistently, is that loving a child means releasing your investment in what they're supposed to become. Li Jing's failure in the first film was not lack of love but excessive investment in his own image of what his son should be. The Dragon King's failure with Ao Bing is similar. He loved his son but used his son, treating him as an instrument for the dragon tribe's restoration rather than as a person with his own soul. The parents who succeed in this universe, primarily Lady Yin, and Li Jing after his hard-won growth, are the ones who love their children as they are rather than as they're supposed to be. That message, delivered through the spectacle of divine warfare and cosmic mythology, lands with quiet, persistent power, social class and divine hierarchy. One of the more sophisticated thematic moves in Ne Zha 2 is its engagement with questions of class and social hierarchy through the lens of the divine order. The celestial court is explicitly a class system, beings are ranked, ordered, assigned roles, and those ranks determine their worth and their access to resources and protection. Ne Zha and Ao Bing are both, in different ways, beings who don't fit cleanly into this hierarchy. Ne Zha because of his demonic origin. Ao Bing because of his shattered spirit pearl, his compromised status. And the film makes very clear that the hierarchy's inability to accommodate them is not a neutral fact but a political choice. The hierarchy doesn't fail them because it lacks the capacity to include the M. It fails them because including them would require acknowledging that the categories it's built on are arbitrary and self-serving. This is pointed social commentary, and in the context of a Chinese animated film aimed at broad audiences, it's genuinely bold. The film isn't suggesting revolution in any explicit sense. But it is clearly and consistently arguing that systems of cosmic authority can be wrong, that those systems need to be challenged, and that the people best positioned to challenge them are the ones who have already been failed by them. Part 6, Technical and Artistic Review. Animation, a new standard. Let me be completely direct with you, The animation in Ne Zha 2 represents a genuine leap forward for Chinese animation as an industry. We're not talking incremental improvement here. We're talking about a studio that has, over the course of 6 years, solved problems that Western studios have been wrestling with for decades and synthesized those solutions with a distinctly Chinese aesthetic vocabulary to create something entirely their own. The character animation is remarkably expressive. Ne Zha in particular is animated with a physicality, a looseness in his movement, a specific set of habitual gestures and postures, that makes him feel like an actual living entity rather than a constructed digital character. He leans forward when he's angry. He rocks slightly on his heels when he's waiting. He does this specific thing with his hands when he's concentrating that looks exactly like what a kid who's been practicing martial arts since he could walk would look like. These details accumulate into something that feels phenomenally alive. The fluid dynamics, water, fire, energy, spiritual force, are extraordinary. The Dragon Tribe sequences in particular showcase water and ice effects that are genuinely jaw-dropping. Zha and Ao Bing's full form, vast, serpentine, encrusted with ice crystal armor, is rendered in a way that captures both its enormous physical scale and the intricate detail of every scale and crystal formation simultaneously. I don't know entirely how they did it, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment. The background art deserves particular mention. The celestial realm in this film is rendered with a visual density that rewards attention. There is so much detail in those backgrounds, so much mythology compressed into architectural choices and atmospheric effects, that you could pause on individual frames and study them for hours. The same is true of the Dragon Palace sequences. These are environments that feel genuinely lived in, genuinely cosmic, genuinely other. Direction, Zhao Zi's confidence. If the first Ne Zha film demonstrated that Zhao Zi was a major talent, the second film confirms that he is a genuine master. His directorial growth between the two films is visible in nearly every sequence. The first film's direction was exuberant but occasionally uncertain. You could feel the filmmaker reaching for something and not quite always catching it. The second film has no such moments. Every sequence in Ne Zha 2 is exactly as long as it needs to be, moves exactly as fast as it needs to move, and makes exactly the visual and emotional point it needs to make. The pacing across a very long film is controlled with impressive discipline. His use of silence is particularly sophisticated. In a film of this much spectacle and noise, the quiet moments stand out powerfully, and Zhao Zi clearly understands that silence is not absence of content but a different kind of content. The quiet moments in this film are as carefully crafted as the most explosive action sequences, and they carry at least equal emotional weight. Music, ancient and modern in dialogue. The film's score is another area of significant achievement. Composer Zhang Jiading has created something that effectively bridges traditional Chinese musical instruments and contemporary orchestral arrangement without making either element feel tokenistic or forced. The traditional elements, erhu, pipa, various percussion instruments, are used not as decorative local color but as structural elements of the score's architecture. They carry thematic weight. Ne Zha has specific themes associated with him that use these instruments in ways that feel organic rather than designed, as if these sounds emerged from his character rather than being applied to it. The battle music in the third act is extraordinary, a wall of sound that somehow remains intelligible throughout, with individual character themes threading through the larger orchestral fabric in ways that let you track the emotional and dramatic landscape of what is a remarkably complex sequence. The film's use of silence during key emotional moments is also worth noting here, because it functions as its own kind of musical choice. The score knows when to get out of the way, and its silences are as expressively managed as its loudest moments. Editing and structure. The editing in Ne Zha 2 is doing more structural work than editing in most animated films has to do, because this is a film with a genuinely complex narrative architecture, multiple storylines, multiple realms, multiple time frames, that has to remain comprehensible and emotionally coherent throughout. The editor manages this with considerable skill. Transitions between storylines are handled with visual and thematic rhymes that keep the connections clear. The parallel structure between Zha and Ao Bing's separate journeys in the first half of the film is maintained through visual echoes, similar framings, similar color temperatures, similar emotional beats, that reinforce the mirrored relationship between the characters even when they're in completely different places. The third act's battle sequence editing is the film's most technically demanding work, and it delivers. Action sequences that involve dozens of characters and multiple distinct combat theaters are kept legible throughout. You always know where everyone is, what they're fighting for, and what's at stake in each individual clash within the larger battle. Part 7, Critical Review and Comparisons. What Ne Zha 2 gets absolutely right. Let me start with the unambiguous positives, because there are many and they deserve full acknowledgement. The film is an extraordinary technical achievement. I've said this repeatedly throughout this script, but it bears final emphasis. Ne Zha 2 represents animation as an art form being pushed to places it hasn't been before, and the visual achievement here is real and significant and deserves recognition on a global stage. The emotional work of the film is genuine. These are characters you care about deeply, and the film earns every emotional beat it reaches for. The relationship between Ne Zha and Ao Bing is one of the most beautifully rendered platonic partnerships in all of animated cinema, and the film treats it with the seriousness and depth it deserves. The thematic ambition is remarkable. This is a film that is genuinely trying to say things about fate and agency, about systems of power, about love and sacrifice and the cost of being different in a world that rewards conformity. And it says those things with clarity and conviction and genuine artistic skill. The world building is extraordinary. The way this film expands the Ne Zha universe, pulling in more of the investiture of the gods' mythology, introducing new cosmic realms and figures, deepening the rules and politics of the divine hierarchy, creates a sense of mythological richness that few fantasy films of any nationality achieve. Where the film has moments of struggle. In the spirit of honest criticism, let me also acknowledge where the film has some relative weaknesses, because no review worth reading is a pure love letter. The film's midsection, roughly the second quarter, occasionally struggles with pacing. The introduction of multiple new mythological figures and cosmic realms in relatively quick succession can create a slight feeling of narrative overload, particularly for viewers who are coming to the film without deep familiarity with Chinese mythology. The first film was more narratively contained, and that containment gave it a certain clarity of focus that the sequel sacrifices for scale. Some of the secondary villains in the second act feel underdeveloped, their vivid visual designs with imposing power levels, but they don't get enough narrative space to become truly resonant antagonists. They function primarily as obstacles in the quest structure rather than as fully realized characters. The film's ambition has to carry so much mythological and narrative freight that some character development inevitably gets compressed. The very end of the film, after the climactic battle, in the wrap-up sequences, moves somewhat more quickly than the emotional weight of what precedes it might seem to demand. The film earns a longer, more contemplative denouement, and while what it gives you is beautiful, there's a slight sense of being handed a fortune cookie when you were hoping for a full dessert. Comparisons to Hollywood and world cinema. It's impossible to talk about Ne Zha 2 without discussing how it positions itself relative to the global animated film landscape, and in particular relative to what Hollywood has been producing. The obvious comparison points are the big Disney and Pixar films. And what's interesting is how direct that comparison is becoming. Ne Zha 2 is not a film that is reaching for Hollywood validation or mimicking Hollywood aesthetic choices. It is a film that is operating in full confidence on its own aesthetic terms, and in doing so is matching and in some areas exceeding what the most technically accomplished Hollywood animation studios are doing. The emotional sophistication of Ne Zha 2 compares favorably favorably to Pixar at its best. The thematic depth, the genuine philosophical and social content, exceeds most of what Disney has produced in the last decade. The visual imagination rivals anything in the Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse or Across the Spider-Verse tradition, which represents the current peak of American animation's visual experimentation. If I'm being direct, Ne Zha 2 is better than most animated films Hollywood has produced in the last 5 years. Not in every dimension, Hollywood still produces more consistently polished supporting character work, and the first acts of the best Pixar films have a narrative efficiency that is genuinely hard to match. But in terms of visual ambition, emotional depth, thematic substance, and sheer cinematic boldness, Ne Zha 2 is operating at the top tier of global animation. Comparisons to other mythological epics are also instructive. The film does something that live-action mythological epics, your Clash of the Titans, your Thor, your Hercules franchise products, almost never do. It takes its mythology seriously. Not reverently, not stubbornly, but with genuine engagement and care. It treats the investiture of the gods' mythology not as a source of visual material to be looted for spectacle but as a genuine imaginative universe with its own internal logic and ethical weight. That seriousness elevates it above most mythological blockbusters in any medium. Part 8, Final Verdict and Ending. What this film is really about. Okay. We're in the final stretch. And before I give you my rating, I want to spend a few minutes on what I think this film is ultimately about. What it's saying. What it's for. Because I've been talking about plot and character and visual achievement for over an hour now, and I want to make sure that none of that drowns out the most essential thing about Ne Zha 2, which is that it is, at its deepest level, a film about the experience of being told you don't belong. Ne Zha has been told his entire existence that he is wrong. That he is a mistake. That the universe would be better, cleaner, more orderly, more just, without him in it. And across 2 films, we have watched him refuse that verdict. Not because he has a grand theory of selfhood. Not because he's read the right books or had the right mentors. But because people have loved him. Because he has had a mother who looked at him and saw her son. A friend who looked at him and saw a brother. A father who, late, painfully, imperfectly, looked at him and decided to stand in front of the lightning. Ne Zha doesn't defeat fate through ideology. He defeats it through love. Through the accumulated weight of people who chose to see him as real and worthy of existing. And the film's argument is that this is not a small or private thing. This is a cosmic force. This is the most powerful thing in the universe. In a world, in a real, contemporary, human world, where vast numbers of people are being told by vast systems that they are wrong, that they don't fit, that they would be better off not existing, that argument is not just mythological. It is urgent. It is radical. It is necessary. That's what Ne Zha 2 is about. Underneath all the fire and ice and divine warfare and dragon palaces and cosmic politics, underneath all the breathtaking beauty and all the earned emotion and all the mythological richness, it is about the right to exist as yourself. The absolute, non-negotiable, cosmically grounded right of every person to exist on their own terms, to be seen and loved for what they actually are, and to refuse completely and without apology, any verdict that says otherwise. That is a message worth an animated film. Worth 6 years of work. Worth an hour and a half of your life. Who this film is for. Ne Zha 2 is for everyone. But let me be more specific, because I think there are several audiences who will find something particular and precious in this film. It's obviously for people who loved the first film. If Ne Zha, Birth of the Demon Child moved you, and if you haven't seen it, stop this video right now, go watch it, come back. The second film will be a deeply satisfying continuation and expansion of everything that made you love the first one. It's for animation enthusiasts of any background who want to see the medium being pushed to its absolute limits. Ne Zha 2 will make you feel things about animation as an art form that you may not have felt in years. It's for anyone interested in mythology and fantasy who is hungry for something that isn't derived from European or American source material. This film opens a window into one of the richest mythological traditions in human history and does so with accessibility and generosity toward audiences who are coming to it fresh. And it is, perhaps most specifically, for anyone who has ever been told by a system, any system, that they are wrong for existing. That they don't fit. That the universe would be tidier without them. This film is a letter to those people. And the letter says, fight. Love fiercely, accept love when it's offered, find your Ao Bing, stand on your fire wheels, and fight. Final rating. Ne Zha 2 is one of the most ambitious, visually extraordinary, emotionally resonant, and thematically rich animated films I have ever seen. It has weaknesses, some pacing issues in the middle, some underdeveloped secondary characters, a denouement that moves slightly faster than it should. But those weaknesses are real without being significant. They are the weaknesses of a film that is attempting too much, which is a far more interesting kind of failure than the weakness of a film that attempts too little. The achievements of this film, its visual achievement, its emotional depth, its mythological richness, its central relationships, its thematic substance, are not just significant in the context of Chinese animation or in comparison to contemporary Hollywood. They are significant in the context of animated cinema's entire history. My rating for Ne Zha 2 is a 9.3 out of 10. That 0.7 that it's missing represents the pacing issues and the underdeveloped antagonists I mentioned. But make no mistake, a 9.3 is not a hedged compliment. A 9.3 is a film that I will think about for years. A film that moved me. A film that showed me things I hadn't seen before. A film that made me believe, genuinely and completely, for the duration of its running time, in a world where gods and demons wage war in burning skies, and where a demon child with fire in his eyes and a universe ring in his hand looks up at heaven and says, quite simply, no, you do not get to tell me what I am. I decide that. Outro music swells. That's my breakdown and review of Ne Zha 2. If you made it this far, genuinely, thank you. This is a film that deserved a long conversation, and I hope this gave you one. Whether you've seen it and wanted to process it, or you're coming to it fresh and trying to decide whether it's worth your time, it is. Without any hesitation. It is absolutely worth your time. Drop a comment below. Have you seen Ne Zha 2? What hit you hardest? Was it the battle sequences? Was it Ao Bing? Was it Lady Yin watching her son's hands flicker? Tell me where the film got you, because I want to know. If this video was useful to you, a like and subscribe keeps this channel going and tells YouTube to show this to more people who might love it as much as we do. Until next time, keep watching, keep thinking, and remember, your fate is not a cage.
Run!
Buildings are falling!
This way! Hurry!
Descend now, Ao Bing! Only if you can stop me! Ah!
And the frost!